The Tselvian fleet hovered over Mars Colony 7, their massive warships casting long shadows over the red planet's surface. The ground trembled as the alien war machine prepared for destruction. The people of Mars Colony had known this day was coming, but no one had expected it to happen so soon. Inside the Tselvian command ship, Supreme Commander Vorquath stood tall, his 6 eyes glowing with amusement as he watched the human defenders scramble below. His second-in-command, General Xaltor, laughed. "This is almost sad," Xaltor sneered. "They send metal boxes with wheels to fight us." On the massive holoscreen in front of them, ancient Earth-made tanks rolled onto the battlefield. The rusted machines were slow, clunky, and outdated compared to the sleek, hovering Tselvian battle tanks. Commander Vorquath smirked. "The humans are a stubborn species. They still think they can fight." He tapped a control on his wrist, and suddenly, a deep, booming voice echoed across the human comm channels. "Humans of Mars Colony 7, Vorquath announced, his voice dripping with condescension. "Is this truly your best? Do you expect to stand against the might of the Tselvian Empire with this?" The holoscreen flickered again, this time showing a close-up of an old, Earth-made tank. It was covered in dust, its paint chipped away by centuries of neglect. The Tselvian soldiers on board their warships erupted into laughter. Bonner clenched his fists as he watched the broadcast from an underground bunker. The aliens were mocking them, mocking the very machines that had once been the pride of human warfare. He could see his soldiers shifting uncomfortably, their morale sinking with every word of the alien commander's speech. "They think we're a joke," one of his men muttered. Bonner took a deep breath, suppressing his anger. He turned to the group of engineers and mechanics working frantically to bring the tanks back to life. Sparks flew as welding torches sealed cracks in the armor. Old railgun cannons were being attached, ammunition belts reloaded, targeting systems recalibrated. "They can laugh all they want," Bonner finally said, his voice steady. "But we're about to give them a history lesson they won't forget." Outside, the Tselvian bombardment began. The sky turned crimson as plasma blasts rained down, obliterating entire sections of the colony. Buildings that had stood for decades were reduced to rubble in seconds. Screams echoed through the communication channels. "Sector 4 has been wiped out. They took down our last anti-air defense. We can't stop them." Bonner grabbed his helmet and slid it on. There was no more time for hesitation. He climbed onto one of the old tanks and activated the comms. "All units, mount up. We're not going down without a fight." One by one, the old war machines roared to life. Thick black smoke belched from their exhausts as their engines powered up. The ground rumbled as the first line of tanks began rolling toward the battlefield. In the Tselvian command ship, Vorquath watched in amusement. "They're actually attacking," he said, shaking his head. "With those pathetic relics." Xaltor chuckled. "Let them come. It will make our victory even more entertaining." The Tselvian hover tanks moved forward, gliding smoothly over the rocky terrain. Their plasma cannons glowed with deadly energy. Then the battle began. The first human tank fired. A high-velocity railgun round sliced through the air and struck one of the Tselvian hover tanks. The alien vehicle exploded instantly, torn apart by the sheer force of the impact. The laughter inside the command ship stopped. "What?" Vorquath's eyes widened. Another human tank fired, and another Tselvian vehicle burst into flames. The old war machines weren't useless after all. Bonner grinned as he watched the destruction unfold. The tanks might have been ancient, but their new modifications had turned them into deadly weapons. "They wanted a fight," Bonner muttered. "Let's give them one." The battle was far from over, but for the first time in hours, hope flickered among the human defenders. The Tselvians had underestimated them, and now they were about to pay for it. The underground bunker was filled with the sound of frantic work, sparks flying, metal clanking, engines rumbling back to life after decades of silence. The air smelled of oil and burning circuits as engineers and mechanics scrambled to bring the old war machines back from the dead. Every second counted. Every mistake could mean death. Bonner walked through the dimly lit garage, his boots splashing in puddles of coolant leaking from the old fuel lines. His heart pounded in his chest, but his face remained calm. He had to be the rock his people needed. If they saw fear in their leader's eyes, they would break before the battle even began. "Status report," he said, his voice firm but low. A mechanic, her face smeared with grease, wiped her hands on her tattered uniform and gestured toward the nearest tank. "We're patching up the armor as fast as we can. These beasts are tough, but they weren't built for plasma warfare." Another engineer, crouched beside an exposed engine block, spoke without looking up. "The old combustion engines are giving us trouble. These machines were meant to run on refined fuel, but we're making do with whatever we can find. If one of these stalls in the middle of battle..." "We don't have a choice," Bonner interrupted. "Make it work." He ran his hand over the cold steel of an old M1A2 Abrams tank, its once pristine paint chipped away by time. It had seen war long before he was even born. Now it was being asked to fight once more, not against other humans, but against something far worse, something far more advanced. The Xelvians had mocked these machines, calling them relics of a primitive species. Maybe they were right. Maybe humans weren't as advanced as the rest of the galaxy. But Bonner had seen time and time again that war wasn't won by technology alone. It was won by the will to survive. He turned to the group of tech specialists working beside a stripped-down tank chassis. "Tell me about the upgrades." A young engineer, barely out of his teens, adjusted his glasses and pointed to a collection of scavenged alien parts scattered across the floor. "We managed to salvage some cloaking tech from a downed Selvian scout ship. It's crude, and it won't last forever, but it should give us a few minutes of invisibility." Bonner raised an eyebrow. "A few minutes is all we need." The engineer grinned, his confidence growing. "We also retrofitted the old turrets with railgun barrels. It won't fire as fast as their plasma cannons, but if we hit them, they'll feel it." Another soldier, a hardened veteran with cybernetic implants on his arms, chimed in. "EMP shielding has been installed. Those alien bastards love using energy-based weapons to disable enemy vehicles. That won't work on us anymore." Bonner let a small smirk creep onto his face. The Selvians expected to steamroll them. They thought they were fighting an army of outdated machines and desperate men. They had no idea what was coming. In the far corner of the bunker, a group of soldiers stood around a holomap of the battlefield, discussing strategy. Bonner approached, listening to the chatter. "We can't match them in open combat," one soldier said. "Their hover tanks are faster, their weapons are stronger." "We won't fight them head-on," Bonner replied. "We use the terrain. We set traps. We hit them where it hurts." Another soldier, a grizzled veteran named O'Reilly, crossed his arms. "Guerrilla warfare, then." Bonner nodded. "That's how we win. We make them doubt their own strength. We make them hesitate, because the moment they do, we strike." The soldiers exchanged glances, their determination hardening. This was a suicide mission, and they all knew it. But if they were going to die, they would make sure the Xelvians paid for every drop of human blood they spilled. A loud explosion shook the bunker, dust raining down from the ceiling. The Xelvians were getting closer. They had to move now. Bonner climbed onto the nearest tank, gripping the side as the engine roared beneath him. He activated his comms. "All units, listen up. The enemy thinks we're weak. They think we're broken. Let's show them what happens when you push humanity to the edge." The response was immediate. A chorus of voices, some screaming, some laughing, some filled with rage. They were ready. The heavy steel doors of the bunker groaned as they began to open, revealing the burning landscape outside. Fires raged in the distance, the colony's skyline reduced to crumbling ruins. Xelvian hover tanks patrolled the outskirts, their cannons glowing with lethal energy. Bonner exhaled slowly. The last of Earth's war machines were rolling out for battle. And this time, they weren't fighting alone. They were fighting with every soldier who had fallen, with every family that had been lost. They were fighting for humanity itself. The comeback had begun. The ground trembled as the old war machines rolled forward, their engines growling like ancient beasts awakened from a long slumber. Bonner stood atop one of the tanks, gripping the side of the turret as dust and smoke swirled around him. The Tselvian forces were just ahead, their sleek hover tanks gliding effortlessly over the battlefield. The alien war machines made no sound, no growl of an engine, no clatter of metal, just an eerie hum as they hovered inches above the scorched ground. Bonner could already hear the voices of the Tselvian commanders in his head. Pathetic humans. Outdated technology. A battle already won. They had laughed when they saw the old tanks. They had mocked the humans, calling them primitive. But war wasn't just about technology. It was about strategy. It was about determination. He activated his comms. Hold the line. Let them come closer. The human tanks remained still, positioned behind ruined buildings, half buried in the rubble, hidden behind ridges of cracked earth. The enemy would see them, but they wouldn't attack immediately. The Tselvians would hesitate. Why weren't the humans running? The alien commander's voice crackled through the open channels. Surrender, humans. Your struggle is meaningless. Bonner clenched his jaw. He watched as the Tselvian hover tanks closed in, their plasma cannons glowing with energy. The first shot was fired, a bright blue bolt of plasma streaking through the air. It struck a broken building, sending molten debris flying in all directions. Still, the human tanks didn't move. The Tselvian forces advanced. Their confidence grew. Bonner waited. 50 meters. 40. 30. Now, the first human tank fired. The railgun-mounted turret kicked back violently as it unleashed a devastating round. The shot tore through the air, slamming into the nearest Tselvian hover tank. The alien vehicle exploded instantly, ripped apart by the sheer force of the impact. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Human tanks roared to life, moving in coordinated groups. The old war machines charged forward, their heavy treads crushing everything beneath them. The sheer sound of them, a deafening symphony of steel and fire, sent a shiver down the spines of even the most battle-hardened soldiers. The Tselvians panicked. This wasn't the battle they had expected. They had seen slow, outdated machines and assumed an easy victory. But now, the humans were fighting back, and their weapons were lethal. Bonner's tank fired again, taking out another Tselvian vehicle. To his right, O'Reilly's tank launched an explosive shell that landed in the middle of an advancing alien squad. The ground lit up with fire, sending bodies flying. The cloaking devices scavenged from the enemy had been crude, but they worked. For brief moments, the tanks flickered out of sight, confusing the enemy long enough for them to reposition and strike from unexpected angles. A group of Tselvian hover tanks tried to flank the humans, moving in from the side. Bonner saw them, his heart pounding. If they got behind the tanks, it would be a massacre. Alpha Team, move to intercept. 3 human tanks turned sharply, cutting off the Tselvians before they could get into position. A brutal exchange of fire followed. Plasma bolts slammed into human armor, melting steel, sending shrapnel flying. One of the human tanks took a direct hit, its side armor blasted apart. Flames erupted from its hull. The crew tried to escape, but the Tselvians showed no mercy. Another plasma bolt struck, engulfing the vehicle in a fiery explosion. Bonner gritted his teeth. Keep pushing forward. The battle raged on. Smoke filled the air. Fire burned across the landscape. The once proud colony had become a graveyard of metal and bodies. The Tselvians were losing ground. They had come expecting a slaughter. Instead, they found themselves fighting for survival. Their commanders barked frantic orders, their hover tanks retreating, their formations breaking apart. But humans weren't done yet. Bonner switched channels, calling to the artillery teams hidden further back. Now, hit them hard. A moment later, the sky lit up. Salvaged Selvian artillery cannons, repurposed by human engineers, fired their stolen payloads. The plasma shells rained down on the retreating Selvian forces, ripping through their defenses. Alien war machines that had once terrorized human worlds were now being destroyed by their own weapons. The Selvian flagship, hovering high above, watched the disaster unfold. Their forces, once overwhelming, were now in full retreat. Inside the command ship, Supreme Commander Vorquath's 6 eyes widened in disbelief. Impossible. Humans weren't just surviving. They were winning. Bonner stood atop his tank, watching the aliens flee. His breath was heavy, his body exhausted. But he knew this was far from over. They had won the first battle. But the war had only just begun. The battlefield was silent in the aftermath of the first clash. Smoke curled into the sky, rising from the wreckage of Selvian war machines. The alien forces had retreated, leaving behind burning hover tanks and the bodies of their fallen. But Bonner knew better than to celebrate. The Selvians weren't defeated. They were regrouping. Bonner climbed down from his tank, boots crunching against the scorched ground. The smell of burning metal and flesh filled the air. His soldiers moved through the ruins, checking the wreckage for anything salvageable. Every plasma cartridge, every functional alien rifle, anything that could be used, was collected. They were still outgunned, still outnumbered, and every advantage mattered. O'Reilly limped over, his armor scorched, a deep gash across his cheek. "We got him good, Bonner." He spat blood and wiped his face. "But they'll be back. Stronger." Bonner nodded. "And we'll be ready." He turned to the engineers and mechanics already working on the damaged tanks. Sparks flew as they welded armor plates, scavenged from enemy wreckage onto the old war machines. These tanks had survived one battle, but they needed to last an entire war. A voice crackled through his earpiece. It was Lieutenant Hayes, stationed on the eastern ridge. "Commander, we've intercepted enemy transmissions. They're sending in reinforcements, heavy ones." Bonner exhaled slowly. It was exactly what he expected. The Selvians had underestimated them once. They wouldn't make the same mistake again. "We hit them first," Bonner said, "before they can regroup." O'Reilly frowned. "A counterattack? With what?" Bonner gestured around them. "With everything we have." The plan was simple. Strike hard, strike fast, and cripple the Selvian reinforcements before they could deploy in full force. It was a gamble, but the Selvians were used to being the hunters. If humanity made them feel hunted, it could shift the war in their favor. Bonner gathered his best soldiers and engineers. He laid out the plan quickly, no time for debates. They would divide into 3 strike teams. Team Alpha would flank from the west, using the rubble and ruins as cover. Team Bravo, equipped with the most heavily modified tanks, would launch a direct assault, drawing enemy fire. Team Charlie, using stolen Selvian vehicles, would infiltrate their supply lines and destroy their landing zones. The tanks rumbled to life, their engines roaring in defiance. Soldiers climbed aboard, weapons ready. Bonner checked his rifle, took one last look at his men, and climbed onto his own tank. "Move out." The counterattack had begun. They approached the Selvian encampment under the cover of darkness. The alien forces had set up a temporary base in the ruins of the colony's industrial sector, using their advanced technology to reinforce damaged buildings and construct a defensive perimeter. Bonner peered through binoculars. Hover tanks, automated turrets, infantry patrols. The Selvians were expecting an attack, but not this one. He switched on his comms. "All teams, check in. Alpha team, in position. Bravo team, ready to roll. Charlie team, standing by." Bonner took a deep breath. Now or never. He raised his fist, then dropped it. Attack. The first shot came from Bravo team. A railgun blast that tore through a Xelvian hover tank before the aliens even realized they were under attack. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Tanks roared forward, firing everything they had. Bonner's tank blasted through the outer defenses, crushing alien barricades beneath its heavy treads. Plasma bolts rained down, but the reinforced armor held, at least for now. The Xelvians scrambled to respond. Their infantry took cover, returning fire with rapid energy blasts. Automated turrets whirred to life, targeting the advancing tanks. Bonner's vehicle took a hit, the impact shaking him to his core. A warning light flashed red. Damage to left side armor. "Keep moving," Bonner shouted. From the west, Alpha Team struck hard, their tanks emerging from the ruins like ghosts. They hit the enemy's flank with ruthless precision, their modified weapons cutting through alien ranks. Then came Charlie Team. Disguised in stolen Xelvian vehicles, they rolled straight into the enemy's supply lines. The deception worked, for a moment. Then the aliens realized the trick. Charlie Team opened fire. Explosions ripped through the enemy camp. Fuel depots ignited in a chain reaction, sending fireballs into the sky. Xelvian soldiers screamed, caught in the inferno. Their communication towers collapsed as carefully placed charges detonated, cutting off their ability to call for reinforcements. The Xelvian command center was burning. The alien Supreme Commander, Vorkwath, watched in horror from his flagship. This was not how it was supposed to go. The humans were supposed to be on the defensive, not attacking, not winning. Bonner stood atop his tank, watching the Xelvian forces crumble. The air was thick with smoke, the ground littered with alien bodies. The tide had turned. For the first time in the war, humanity wasn't just surviving. They were striking back. The sky burned red. Explosions tore through the horizon as the Xelvian fleet descended in full force. Their arrogance was gone. They weren't mocking humanity anymore. Now, they were desperate to wipe them out. Bonner stood atop his battered tank, the heat from the distant fires licking at his face. The ground was littered with the wreckage of both human and Xelvian machines. Smoke curled into the air, carrying the scent of burning metal and scorched earth. O'Reilly limped up beside him, gripping his rifle tightly. "They're throwing everything at us this time." His voice was hoarse, exhaustion creeping in. "What's the plan, Commander?" Bonner clenched his fists. They had come too far to fall now. The counterattack had devastated the enemy, but the Xelvians had regrouped faster than expected. Their flagship loomed above, blocking out the stars, and waves of alien dropships were already descending onto the battlefield. "This is it," Bonner said. "Our last stand." The remaining soldiers gathered around. There weren't many left. Battle-worn men and women covered in dust, wounds hastily patched, ammunition running low. The last of Earth's warriors. Bonner pointed at the ruins behind them. "That colony was our home, and it will be again." He gestured to the sky, where the Xelvian forces loomed. "But if we run now, if we let them take this world, then we'll never stop running. We make our stand here." A murmur spread through the ranks. They were tired, hurt, but they weren't broken. O'Reilly grinned, wiping blood from his brow. "Dan right. The makeshift defenses had been set. They had no reinforcements, no escape plan. Just a handful of soldiers and their war machines, scared, repaired, but still fighting." The Xelvians came. Their hover tanks surged forward, sleek and deadly, plasma cannons glowing with energy. Infantry moved in formation, weapons charged, ready to purge the last of the resistance. Above them, the massive guns of the flagship powered up, preparing to rain destruction on the battlefield. Bonner raised his fist. Fire. The battlefield erupted. The first shot came from one of the last remaining human artillery pieces, a salvaged Xelvian plasma cannon mounted on a makeshift turret. The beam ripped through the enemy lines, sending a hover tank tumbling in a fiery explosion. Human tanks roared forward, the relics of war made unstoppable. They charged head-on, railguns, and modified cannons, unleashing hell. The Xelvians returned fire. Plasma bolts slammed into human armor, melting steel, sending men and women flying. One of the tanks took a direct hit and erupted into flames. The crew barely had time to scream before the fire consumed them. Bonner gritted his teeth. He had seen too many good people die today. He grabbed the radio. Hold the line. No matter what. The battle was chaos. Smoke filled the air, turning the battlefield into a vision of hell. Xelvian forces pushed forward, but the humans refused to break. They fought with everything they had: old tanks, scavenged weapons, sheer will. And then, the flagship fired. A beam of pure energy descended from the sky, carving a trench of destruction through the battlefield. Buildings evaporated, tanks melted. The ground shook as the force of the blast sent debris flying. Bonner barely managed to throw himself behind cover as the shockwave hit. The radio crackled. "Commander." The signal cut out. Another blast followed, taking out a full squad. Bonner's heart pounded. The Xelvians weren't just attacking now. They were exterminating. He grabbed the comms. "Charlie team, is the payload ready?" A voice answered, "Almost there. We need more time." Bonner turned to O'Reilly. "We have to buy them that time." O'Reilly wiped sweat from his face. "Then let's give 'em hell." They charged forward, rifles blazing. The remaining tanks fought like demons, blasting through enemy lines, pushing forward when they should have fallen back. Every second mattered. Because deep beneath the battlefield, in a hidden tunnel, Charlie team was working on humanity's last gambit, a captured Xelvian warhead. Reprogrammed, redirected, aimed at their flagship. If it worked, it would turn the tide. If it failed, humanity was finished. The final wave of Xelvian troops stormed the last human stronghold. It was brutal, relentless. Plasma bolts cut through the air. Blades clashed in close combat. The last warriors of Earth fought with everything they had. And then, through the chaos, Charlie team's leader shouted into the comms. "Payload armed. Launching. Now." For a second, nothing happened. Then, from beneath the ruins, a stolen Xelvian missile launched into the sky. The flagship's shields flickered as they detected the incoming threat. Too late. The missile hit. A massive explosion ripped through the flagship's core. Fires engulfed the alien warship. The sky lit up as the Xelvian flagship began to fall. The remaining alien forces, seeing their command ship breaking apart, panicked. Their advance crumbled. Some tried to retreat. Others fought harder out of desperation. But it was clear. The battle was lost. Bonner, covered in dust and blood, watched as the enemy forces collapsed. The ground trembled as the flagship crashed into the earth, its wreckage scattering across the battlefield. Silence followed. Then, cheers. Ragged, broken, victorious cheers. They had won. Humanity had stood against an empire, and humanity had prevailed. The battlefield was silent. Smoke still rose from the wreckage of the Xelvian flagship, its once mighty form now reduced to a burning carcass of twisted metal. The alien war machine, which had brought terror to countless worlds, lay broken on human soil. The night sky, once filled with the glow of enemy ships, was now eerily dark. The invasion was over. Humanity had survived. Bonner stood among the ruins, his boots crunching over shattered alien armor. The victory felt surreal. They had fought with scraps, outdated war machines, and sheer willpower. And yet, they had crushed an empire's finest. The Xelvians had underestimated them, believing humanity to be weak. That arrogance had cost them everything. O'Reilly limped beside him, his rifle slung over his back. His face was smeared with dirt and dried blood, but his grin was as wide as ever. "They actually ran," he muttered. "The great Xelvian warlords, running like scared dogs." Bonner exhaled, scanning the battlefield. "They're not coming back. Not after this." Across the ruins, survivors emerged from the wreckage, scared soldiers, wounded but alive, clinging to whatever weapons they had left. Engineers moved among the fallen tanks, checking for anything that could be salvaged. The victory had come at a cost. They had lost too many, but they had done the impossible. A transmission crackled through Bonner's earpiece. It was from one of the remaining orbital satellites, one of the few that hadn't been destroyed in the war. The voice on the other end was filled with disbelief. "Commander, we're picking up Selvian distress signals across the sector. They're calling for retreat. Their entire fleet is withdrawing." Bonner exchanged a look with O'Reilly. "They're abandoning the invasion. They're not just retreating from this planet," the voice continued. "They're pulling back everywhere, across the entire galactic front." For the first time, true silence fell over the battlefield. The implications were staggering. The Selvians weren't just running from Earth, they were running from humanity. The news spread faster than fire through dry grass. Across the galaxy, warlords, empires, and entire species watched in shock. The Selvians had been the dominant force in the sector for centuries. They had conquered world after world, erasing civilizations that stood in their way. And yet, a backwater species, one that wasn't even considered worth conquering, had not only survived their invasion, but shattered their might. The battle reports circulated among the stars. Footage from Selvian scout ships leaked into black market networks. The entire galaxy watched grainy, war-torn images of ancient human tanks tearing through alien war machines, of outnumbered soldiers refusing to break, of a Selvian flagship crashing in flames. And the galaxy began to fear. If humanity could do this with old technology, what would they become if given time? If they could turn rusted relics into weapons of devastation, what could they do with real war machines? The whispers began in the dark corners of the universe. Humanity was dangerous. Back on Earth, the survivors gathered at the remnants of their stronghold. Fires flickered in the night as the wounded were tended to, the dead honored. Bonner stood atop a broken Selvian transport, overlooking the gathered soldiers. He took a deep breath. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a king. He was just a soldier. But at this moment, they needed a leader. "We were supposed to lose," he said, his voice carrying through the crowd. "They came here expecting us to kneel, expecting us to die." A murmur rippled through the survivors. "But we didn't," he continued. "We fought. We adapted. We turned their own arrogance against them. And now, the mighty Selvian Empire is running. Because of us." He let that sink in before he spoke again. "We are not the strongest. We are not the most advanced. But we are something far more dangerous." His eyes swept over his people, over the battered tanks, the blood-stained uniforms, the defiant fires that still burned. "We are human." A roar erupted from the survivors. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were warriors. The Selvian War Council convened in a secret chamber on their homeworld. Supreme Commander Vorquath stood before them, his usual arrogance replaced with unease. "The invasion has failed," he admitted. "Humanity is not what we believe them to be." The council members whispered among themselves. One of them, a high-ranking general, leaned forward. "You promised us victory, Vorquath. You swore Earth would fall in a matter of days. Instead, we lost an entire fleet, a flagship." Vorquath's mandibles clicked in frustration. Their weapons are primitive, their soldiers untrained. And yet, he hesitated, recalling the final battle. The way the humans refused to die. The way they turned old war machines into weapons of destruction. "They are unpredictable," he said finally. "They do not fight like the others we have conquered. They do not submit." A long silence followed. Then, a voice, cold, calculating, spoke from the shadows. It was the grand strategist of the Empire. "They were nothing," the strategist murmured. "And yet, they have made us afraid." His golden eyes gleamed in the dim light. "If we cannot crush them now, then we must ask ourselves a darker question." The room tensed. What will they become? No one answered, because they all knew the truth. Humanity had survived, and that meant humanity had only just begun.